latency stage is from 5 years old until puberty. In this stage, the psychosexual energy is channeled into academic and social pursuits. So that libido goes into school and making friends. And you can't really have conflicts or fixations at this stage. Although academic pursuits, I could probably point out a few professors around here, and that seems to be all they do. So maybe I could write a letter to Freud and see what he says. So there's no erogenous zone, and sexual feelings are suppressed to allow children to focus, again, on other aspects of life that are important to their development, specifically learning, adjusting to the social environment outside of the home, learning culture, forming beliefs and values, developing same-sex friendships, engaging in sports, and this period of latency lasts for a long time until puberty starts. And then children become aware of their capability of reproduction and their sexuality is reawakened. Any of you that have kids that are going into puberty, you see this in children, and it can be very distressing to a parent because that's at a time when little kids start to become little adults. Okay, the last stage is the genital stage, and this is from puberty on, and here the individual gains satisfaction from mature adult relationships. This stage is achieved only if the other stages they are successfully completed and the person still has enough of that libido left in the gas tank. So there's no fixations and they would have normal adult sexuality, which I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I think we have classes here I know about now. So here the erogenous zone is the genitals, gratifying activities would be masturbation and heterosexual relationships. I'm actually surprised that masturbation is in here. I would think that Freud would think that that was fixation at some other stage, but we'll just leave it at that. And then interaction with the environment here is a renewal and sexual interest and desires in pursuit of relationships. And again, fixation doesn't occur at this stage. So fixation would occur at earlier stages. Okay, now we start on the next portion of Freud. And you'll notice a wardrobe change here. Magic video lectures. This is filmed on a different day, and you'll notice that we have a new classroom too. So hopefully this will show up a little bit better. Okay, so we've got two parts to Freud that we've learned. Remember the id, ego, and superego, and then we had the psychosexual stages. Well, now we're on the third part that you have to know, which is the use of defense mechanisms. Okay, so what is a defense mechanism? Well, there's some sort of imbalance between the id and the superego, and the ego has to balance those two forces. And sometimes when things typically from the superego kind of bubble up to consciousness, they cause a great deal of anxiety. And we have to employ a strategy to deal with that anxiety. One of those categories of strategies are the defense mechanisms, and within the defense mechanisms there's a number of them. We're only going to go over a couple today. There's a handful in your book, but there's more out there than that. So a defense mechanism is something that the ego does to protect you from experiencing anxiety. And what this is about, again, is that we have our unconscious, and our unconscious makes up most of our, I don't know how to say this the right way, but a good example that Freud uses, and you'll see in the book often, is that of the iceberg. And so if you imagine an iceberg floating in the water, only 10% of that iceberg is above water, which would be like the conscience, and then 90% is below the water, which is like your unconscious. And here is where a lot of the id desires are. They're in the unconscious, and they'll bubble up to the preconscious or the conscious, which causes anxiety. Now, the ego needs a way to deal with that anxiety, and it uses the process of defense mechanisms. So let's go into a couple to demonstrate what this is. The first one, and the most commonly used, is repression. Repression is the act of pushing the threatening thoughts back into the unconscious. And so this was an explanation, like a Freudian explanation for post-traumatic stress disorder, which in reality, if you look at post-traumatic stress disorder, most people have a re-experiencing of the distressing thoughts, not repressing them, or repressed memories or false memories. That stuff's really kind of proven to be not true. But I think we all kind of instinctively know that we use repression, and it's still a good example. The next one is reaction formation. And reaction formation is actually very interesting. I like this defense mechanism, so you should probably learn this one because I'll probably put it on the midterm. What reaction formation is taking those threatening impulses and then overemphasizing their opposite. So I'm not going to name names, but I can think of like several congressmen or preachers that were really into like hookers or pornography or maybe casual encounters in bathroom stalls in airports or crack cocaine, stuff like that. And then they are very outspoken against these things. So they preach family values, or they might be on the anti-drug coalition or the Christian coalition, and yet at the same time they're engaging in these behaviors. So this is a good example for people that are like very, very, very homophobic, and they turn out to actually be gay themselves. I don't know if you watched the television show Glee. Not that I do, but my wife does, and there's a character on that television show that is a good example for this. Or again, inappropriate sexual escapades by clergymen or politicians who promote family values. In the news right now, and this will kind of date this lecture, but Arnold Schwarzenegger just disclosed that he had an affair with his maid and had a child with her that he's kept hidden from his wife Maria. If we go through the titles of some of Arnold's movies, I think it's a good explanation of this. True Lies, let's see, The Terminator. I'm just trying to make some jokes. They're not very good jokes, so. So that's reaction formation. Denial is another one. Another terrible joke that I have is denial is not just a river in Egypt. Denial is something that we use quite frequently. If you think about your own life, you might recognize the use of denial. I teach a lot of classes in the area of substance abuse, and denial is a symptom of substance abuse and substance dependence. And denial is a refusal to acknowledge any anxiety-provoking stimulus. So once in a while, someone will experience a tragedy, a death in their, maybe of a family member or something like that, and they'll refuse to acknowledge the death. Oftentimes I see people that have cancer or some sort of serious illness, and they'll deny that they even have the illness. They'll think it's just a mistake by the doctor. Sometimes people will have terrible fights with their loved ones, and they'll just dismiss it as something relatively minor, like a lover's quarrel. That's the same process. Projection is a good one. My lovely wife uses projection all the time. So I'll know she's having a bad day at work when she calls me, and I'll say, "Hello," and she'll immediately go, "What's wrong?" And I'll say, nothing's wrong. What's going on? And she'll say, "Something's wrong with you. I can tell something's wrong." And in reality, there's nothing wrong with me, but this is a good clue for me to realize that there's something in fact wrong with her. So what she does is she has these anxiety-provoking thoughts or distressing thoughts, but she projects those onto other people. So that's a good example of that. Displacement is another defense mechanism. The best example that I can think of with this is somebody that has a really rough day at work and they come home and they have safer targets to displace their anger or anxiety on. So the little kids come up to them and they say, oh, you know, mommy or daddy, and the parents yell at the kids. Well, obviously they can't yell at their boss that was giving them such grief at work, but they can yell at their kids, or kick the dog, or, you know, God knows what else. Sublimation is a very interesting defense mechanism, and this one is really recognized as the only positive defense mechanism. So the rest of the defense mechanisms have some negative quality to them. Sublimation, however, takes these dangerous urges, these anxiety or distressing urges that the individual has, and transforms them into meaningful motivation that is socially acceptable. So I had a friend that was kind of aggressive, and you know, I think that oftentimes he'd want to fight other people, and he became a boxer. Or someone might have the urge to cut people or play with knives, and maybe they'll become a surgeon. Some people take their hostility and channel it into artistic expression, stuff like that. So sublimation is thought of as a healthy defense mechanism. Regression is interesting, and regression goes back to our psychosexual stages. So regression is a process of reverting back to a safer time in life. And this might be seen in children that like have a new sibling that's born, and they might want to start using diapers or using a bottle again, but they've already progressed through that stage. Or when adults cry or whimper, or a distressed individual, they might treat their spouse like one of their parents or something like that. So that's another good example. Rationalization is one that I frequently like to employ. Think about your own life and you'll understand what defense mechanisms you like. Rationalization is creating logical, socially acceptable explanations for behaviors which were actually driven by the unconscious. A good example would be like here on the PowerPoint presentation, lying and then claiming the lie was to protect the feelings of another person. So it's basically creating a rational explanation for your behavior. Okay, that's all I want to cover for defense mechanisms, and I think that's good for this chapter. So that's the basics of Freud. Now, theoretically, you could spend like an entire graduate career studying Freud, and there's lots of people that have done so. And his writings are very extensive. You can go and get his original writings and read those if you like, and you can take lots of classes in Freudian theory at like the graduate level. So if this is something you're interested in, more power to you. Go look it up. A lot of Freud's ideas are creative and ingenious. Sometimes I think there's easier explanations for things, so that's not to dismiss Freud's ideas. I think he has a lot of valid ideas. However, he is responsible for really systematically going through the characteristics of personality and trying to give an explanation for how individuals develop those characteristics. So Freud is a good starting point. And next week we pick up with the people that studied with Freud, or Freud's disciples, and we'll see where they diverge. So that's it for this week's lecture.